The insane asylum at Blackwells Island is a human rat trap. It is easy to get in, but once there, it is impossible to get out. Nellie Bly. That was from Tonya Mitchell's new book, A Feigned Madness. Tonya, if you could hold up a copy because mine is reflecting off the screen.
Sure.
A Feigned Madness, which is on sale now. Tonya's short fictions appeared in various journals and anthologies. When she landed on a story about a woman who pretended to be insane in order to write a newspaper story, she knew she'd found something she was meant to write. Her debut novel, A Feigned Madness, the story of Nellie Bly's undercover stay inside a woman's asylum to report the atrocities within, won the Reviewer's Choice Award, say that 3 times fast, and the Cops Featherling Phoenix Award for Best New Voice in Historical Fiction. She lives in Cincinnati, Ohio, with her husband, 3 sons, and an overweight golden doodle. Tonya, welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I'm glad to be here.
And I'm sorry I muffed your award name.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot of types of historical fiction. What exact genre is A Feigned Madness in?
I would call it, there's thriller-esque parts of it once she gets to the asylum, because as you can imagine, it's pretty grim and she wants to get out unscathed. So there's a little bit of that in it, but I would say it's probably leans more towards biographical fiction because the main character was a real character in the 1880s. She was a spunky upstart female reporter at a time when men didn't really want women in journalism. And she decided that she was going to be in journalism, whether they liked it or not. So it follows the story very closely of Nellie Bly.
So what was it about her story that appealed to you? And did you look at other people first when looking for a subject for a book?
She was the first one that I found that I really wanted to write about. I launched on the idea immediately of learning more about her because I was a journalism major back 100 years ago. And I had graduated with that degree and had never heard of her. She had never come up on a syllabus.
Really?
Yes, no classes, nothing. And we studied, great reporters of the time and who had covered World War II and, all these people who really put the face on journalism. And she was never mentioned. And I was absolutely shocked. And I thought, well, how many other people are there who have never heard of her before? Now, some people had heard of her, but not everyone. So I thought that I needed to learn more about her. So I did a deep dive, and everything that I found out about her was just fantastic. The story that I wrote about was really the beginning when she first got started, but there were many more things that she went on to do. So I felt like she had all of the check boxes for a story that I was looking for. And when I found out that, it had been like 130 some years ago that this story happened, and there hadn't been a novel out that fictionalized her story, that was what I decided that I was going to do, that I wanted to do.
And thank goodness you did, because it's a fantastic book.
Oh, thank you so much.
Now, you started in journalism and you did short stories, and then you've done a novel now. Was being a novelist always the goal, or was it a straight path, or?
It's never straight, never a straight path. No, I told my mom when I was 8 years old that I was going to write a novel, and she said, "What's your novel going to be about?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm just going to write a novel." I had that young, spunky, you can do anything, whatever. So I'd always loved to write, and so that's why I went into journalism. But by the time I also had a marketing and business minor, and when I graduated, there were a lot more positions open for marketing. Business than there were journalists. So I went into marketing and business. So I never actually was an active journalist. I just stayed in marketing and business because that's what I like to do. So I worked for a lot of consumer packaged goods companies. And I did that for many years. I was a brand manager for, Sara Lee foods and toy companies. And I really enjoyed what I did, but it wasn't until I got married and had 3 children and they were young that the pull of writing was sort of getting at me, like I wanted to do more of it. But I didn't feel like, because the kids were so young, that I had the headspace to really wrap my head around a novel at that point. So that's when I went into short stories. And I didn't know a lot about short stories because at the time I wasn't reading a lot of them. So that's the first thing I did. I read a lot of short stories. I started subscribing to journals, print journals, anthologies, and I kind of got up to speed on what was getting printed with short stories. And so I started writing them, and then eventually they were getting published. I was in a couple of print anthologies. I won some awards, and I kind of proved to myself that I could do it. I thought, okay, well, the kids are a little bit older now. It's time to start a novel. And believe it or not, I don't think you know this, the first novel that I started was not historical fiction.
Really?
It was young adult fantasy, because
Oh,
I
no.
love fantasy too. Like that's
do
like
you?
like if I could not write historical fiction, I would totally write fantasy, young
You heard
adult
it
or
here, folks.
that's
Breaking
right.
news.
That's right. So I got halfway through that. I was in the middle, and I'm totally a plotter. So like I knew every chapter and how it was going to end, but I couldn't get from what I thought was a great opening and a great finish. I could not write that bridge. And it was when I was wallowing in self-pity that I found the Nellie Bly story. And I'm like, well, how about I try this one? So that's how I found Feigned Madness and decided to write about it.
Are you ever going to go back to that first novel?
You know, I look at it sometimes, but I love historical fiction now a little bit more than I like fantasy. And I read a lot more of historical fiction just to keep up with, you know, what books are coming out and stuff like that. But I probably won't. And that's even, I don't know, but it seems like even more competitive than historical fiction in terms of getting published. So I'll probably
I would imagine.
Fiction, because it really is my first love. I really love it. So.
Oh, good. Well, those of us who loved your book are glad that you're going to keep going in that genre, because I've never tried the fantasy. Your book is, there's no other way to describe it than a page turner, because I mean, I can't tell you, I read it a little while ago, so I can't tell you how long it took me from start to finish, but I do know the house was a mess, because I would start doing something. I gotta find out what happens next. The settings, I mean, they were so vivid, whether it be outside of the asylum or the disturbing inside of the asylum. The other characters, some were sympathetic, some were not. And I held my breath through most of the book. And
I'll take that as a compliment.
It was, yes, because I was like, what's going to happen? And the devices used to control the women in the asylum, some of them were pretty disturbing. How much of what happened in Blackwells was in your book was based on true things that you researched, and how much came out of your imagination? And please tell me all of it came out of your imagination.
No, unfortunately, it didn't. My best source for research was Nellie herself, because she went in for 10 days and got out for the specific purpose of writing an expose of her 10 days there. And it happened in 2 installments in the New York World. And you can still buy that today. You can still get it. It's still in print. It's called, get a copy of it, called 10 Days in a Madhouse. This was my
wow,
old dog-eared copy. It's about the length of a novella. They were very long installments that had illustrations in them even.
Oh, wow.
So she was, because I had it from her own voice. So, I mean, you could, for historical fiction, you can't get a better source from the very person than you're writing about. But I did find other books on what was being done for people who are considered mentally ill, or I guess you could call it what wasn't being done for the mentally ill.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really surprising. It wasn't surprising that people were put away more for incarceration than they were for rehabilitation. So it was about putting people away and sort of locking the door and taking away the key than it was about ever getting people better and getting them back out. That wasn't really too much of a surprise, because we're talking about the 1880s. Mm-hmm. What was a surprise was how grim it was once they were in there. And Nellie didn't sugarcoat any of that. And I didn't feel like I was going to be doing anybody any good, including Nellie herself, to sort of be really light about that and maybe not make it so dark.
Yeah.
I even went further with it than she did, because there was the asylum itself with the wings and the dormitories and where the doctors were. And then there were 2 separate buildings called the Lodge and the Retreat, which were nothing like a lodge and a retreat, because they were the buildings where most of the abuse went on. One of them was more like a solitary confinement where women would be in the dark for days and days and weeks and weeks.
Jeez.
And the other one was more mental and physical abuse and depravity. And in Nellie's account, she learns about them from women who've already been there and are now back at the main asylum. And so I wrote it that way. And when my editor read it, she said, "Oh no, you need to put Nellie inside at least one of those buildings, if not both. Like, we need to experience it through her eyes." And I said,
Wow.
"But that didn't really happen. I don't know if I should do that." And then she said, the first priority of historical fiction, of any fiction, is entertainment. So throw her in over her head, make her experience these things herself. And so that's what I did. But I did find some excellent research. One of them is Damnation Island, Poor, Sick, Mad, and Criminal in 19th Century New York. This is Blackwells Island. And Blackwells Island, it's called Roosevelt Island today. So it's right across the river from downtown Manhattan. So it was a place back then that didn't have the condos and exclusive housing that it does today. It was where you went to prison, you went to an almshouse if you were poor, you went to an insane asylum, or, you know, whatever else was wrong. You know, it was really a one-way ticket across the river to never come back.
I'm trying to think how comfortable I would be in a condo on that island, knowing the history of the island.
It doesn't look anything like that now. It's very exclusive and it's very beautiful.
I would think it would
take a tram across, and it's just very picturesque. It's very beautiful.
That's kind of disturbing in itself.
Yeah. Well, the fact that she knew that, because everybody knew Blackwells Island was sort of a description for, like, a synonym for hell. Nobody wanted to go there. So the fact that she was willing to go there for 10 days really shows how freakishly desperate she was to get a job in New York as a journalist.
Wow. And did she wind up getting appreciated for the work that she did there, or didn't get blown off?
No, she blew the lid off what was going on really on Blackwells Island, on the asylum. And there ended up being a trial that went on, a grand jury investigation into what was going on. Wow. And she went back to the island with the jurors and the judge. And that's all in the book too, because after she gets out, there's a whole lot of other stuff that happens. Yeah. So she really, and there was a lot more money that went to that institution and other state-run institutions in New York at the time, because she did such a good job of writing about how bad it was for these women.
Now, this was an all-women place that she was in. Was there an equivalent for men?
There was. At the beginning, they both men to be there. But at some point, it became so overcrowded that the men were housed north on Ward's Island. So, but they put them on an island too. But even when the men left and it was only women, it was still horribly overcrowded. It was only ever built for about 800 people. And when she was there, there were almost 1,600 women there.
Whoa. Oh my goodness.
Among the many things that were going wrong, one of them was overcrowding.
Wow, I can't even imagine. When I was reading it, I was just like sick that somebody had actually gone through that. You did a really good job of putting me there and making me feel what those women were going through. You know, because you're working with a historical figure, anyone familiar with her knows that she made it out. Did you ever worry about keeping the tension up? And it was a worry you didn't need to have, because you did, because I was, up to the last, I was worried about her, what was going to happen to her, even though I knew she made it out. But did you ever worry about taking on a situation where everybody knows that she made it out, but you need to keep?
I worried a lot about that. And I worried because I thought, maybe this is why no one has written the novel, because everybody knows that Nellie got out. But then I thought, you know, what about all these books that are still out there about the Titanic? You know, we all know that the ship went down, but people are still writing stories about those people on the boat, whether they're fictitious or not, because people are just mesmerized by the fact that there was such a catastrophe like that. And it's the same thing if you think of Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I. You know, we all know so much about their lives because there's so much that's been written about them, and there's so much nonfiction available. But people are still hungry to hear those stories, even if they know what the ending is.
That's true.
I also thought that if I could be a journalist and not know who she was, then there were probably a lot of other people like me who didn't really know the story. There was one, I have to tell you this story because I thought it's so funny. There was a woman who read the book for a book club, and I was asked to be on Zoom as you know, the author to talk about the book. And this woman just loved it. And she said, I have to tell you, I thought that you made the whole thing up until I got to the author's note at the end. And there's a picture, a black and white picture of Nellie Bly. And she said, I just about freaked out. And I said, what did you do? And she said, I went online immediately and I went to Wikipedia and I ordered her biography. She wanted to know everything about her. And I thought it was, wow, I did a good job. I did a good enough job of pretending, you know, that she thought that I had pretended, but you know, she ended up being very real. And I think she was glad that she was real because she realized that there really was somebody that was fighting for women to get into journalism.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and it's really tense. And there's also a light romance that goes weaves throughout the book. In the back of the book, you do a really good explanation of how an author of historical fiction based on a real character, how they develop that world, you know, with the facts that are there and yet make it a novel. Like when you were talking about Nellie had never been in the lodge. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Your explanation was really good because I wondered myself, how do you take a real person and make a fictional novel about it?
So no one could have been more surprised than me that the story of a woman going into this horrible insane asylum where it's so grim and there's so much depravity, there's nothing about romance in there. And so I was shocked to find in her write-up, 10 Days in a Madhouse, there's this paragraph in the middle of the book about a man who came to visit her at the asylum and knew her intimately. But she never tells us who he was, doesn't give us his name. And I thought, she's a journalist and she's there to expose. Why would she never tell us who he was? And who would have known her intimately? There were only two people who knew her, that knew that she was going into the asylum. Her editor knew because he had given her the assignment, and her mother knew because she lived with her mother and had explained, you know, I'm going to be away for 10 days or whatever. Yeah. So yeah. So I thought, how does he even know she was there? How would he even know to look for her there? And why would she not tell us who he was? And so I kind of got that spidey sense where your skin kind of gets prickly and you think, okay, there's something more here. And it's almost like she was giving it to me to write about. And when I realized who he was and why she never disclosed his name, I understood why she never disclosed any more than what she did. It's just a very short little paragraph. But based on that paragraph, I did another deep dive and I figured out who he was, how she had met him, why he was in New York. And I decided that he had to go in the story because I think he was a very important part of her life. Now, is there any evidence that anything went on romantically between them? No, but I am about 99.9% sure that something did because of that strange little paragraph.
It's not everybody you'd visit in an asylum.
No, who would go to visit, you know, and again, she was under an assumed name. Nobody knew she was there. And so I didn't make him up, and I don't believe that I made up their romantic relationship, but I did make up how they communicated because I needed a way, and I can't say too much, but I needed a way that the two of them could communicate sort of secretly because of things that you don't know until you read the book. And I decided that because this was 1880s, that the Victorian language of flowers would be a great way to do it because that was so popular at the time. It was a secret not secret, but it was a communication between lovers where they could convey their feelings with a flower without having to say so or without writing a love letter. And so that's how I have them communicate. So all that you're referencing is in the author's note at the end. That no, he was a real person. I really believe this happened. But the way that they communicated, I have put sort of my spin on it.
And it worked beautifully. And I loved the way that you wrapped it up because the book couldn't have ended on that part of the story any other way. It was really good. And you handled it deftly. I loved it. You know, I know we need to wrap it up soon, but I did want to ask, your book was released right after the first COVID lockdown. And the timing couldn't have been
Hey,
better. And so you didn't have much warning. It was like within a month, your book was coming out. Was there a lot of pivoting that you had to do for your launch? Were you still able to have a launch?
yes. Luckily for me, in that year, I didn't launch until October. So the first lockdown was what, like March, April, May. So the poor people that were launching their books, especially the debuters who really wanted to make a big impact, bookstores weren't open. ARCs weren't even available because the presses had stopped for so long. Right. There was a big backlog with printing. Events, books, book fairs, those weren't going on. It was horrible. I feel the most, looking back, I felt the most remorse for them because there wasn't a plan yet. By the time October rolled around, a lot of bookstores had pivoted to virtual launches through Zoom, even virtual book signings, which was kind of a hard thing to pull off, But yes, I had a lot of book fairs that were canceled. I had book events that were canceled because you couldn't meet face to face. You kind of just do the best with what you could. Yeah. If I could go back, I would have launched in 2019 or 2021, right? Me and everyone else, but you didn't know. So right. I think the good thing for me was that I launched late enough in that year for there have been some things that people were then putting into place that became the way that you could launch your book and, survive in the world of COVID. So
I was getting on a plane in like 3 days for Tucson Festival of Books. And it was like, nah, canceled, over. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And now this year is the first time they're going to be back in person. So try again unless there's something else that comes up. I know that you have an exciting event tomorrow, or I mean, not tomorrow, next week, that people in Cincinnati may want to check out. You want to give it a shout out?
Oh yeah. So there is a new Barnes & Noble store that is opening near me in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's actually in Mason, Ohio. And it opens its doors on Wednesday. And the manager of the store called me several weeks ago and said, would you like to be the author that cuts the ribbon? So I'm going to be wielding giant scissors in about a week from now, cutting the ribbon, and then there'll be a signing once the store opens that morning. So I'm really excited about that.
If you're in the area, remember next Wednesday at what time?
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock. Don't forget. You can see giant scissors in real
giant
life.
Scissors.
Well,
thank you so much for shouting that out.
Sure. And thank you so much for joining us at Blackbird Writers Presents. For those of you watching, you can find more about Blackbird Writers, as well as the links to this and other author interviews at blackbirdwriters.com. And you can find out more about Tonya Mitchell and more about her book, A Feigned Madness, at TonyaMitchellAuthor.com. Thank you so much for joining us, Tonya. It was a lot of fun.
Time always goes so fast.
It does.
I love it, though. It was great.
It does.